Hey everybody. So today I want to take you through the build of this here space yacht. Reconnaissance, Blackbird inspired, sort of Star Warsy, sort of Mass Effectian go fast ship. And through this process you will see some strange idiosyncrasies of mine for sure, and you will see me losing myself in a small task that takes an exorbitant amount of time for some reason. And I'll try and discuss what goes through my mind as I model this. So let's take a look. So here we are in Blender, and as you can see, I'm actually modeling some sort of version of a transport science fiction ship or something. But I had this brain fart, this little idea of something that I guess I saw in my mind's eye, and I allowed myself to pursue that. I do that sometimes. I copy the master object to the side, and I sort of build out the initial sort of the first steps of the idea. That's what I'm doing here. Later on, of course, I'll save the file out in its own file and so on and so forth. But I do this quite a bit when building stuff, and I sort of allow these offshoots, like when you grow plants and you snip off a little offshoot and you plant some more. That's basically what I'm doing here. So I suppose, thinking back on this process, that I saw sort of this sort of elegant, fast shape in the freighter, and I decided to, let's say, scale down the design, so to speak, by placing a big cockpit in here on the front of the craft. And you can see I'm obviously, and of course, using this sort of the kit that I made in collaboration with the guys and the gals from Big Menu Small to get sort of a head start. I believe this might have been a craft that I was designing to stress test the pack as a whole. You know, when you have a selection of weebles and bits and bobs, sometimes you gotta stress test and sort of test drive the parts together to see if you're missing something. Say, are you missing engine parts? Are you missing aerodynamic parts? Are you missing wings or whatever? Yeah, I guess the quick ones of you could see sort of a freighter design in the background. So here I have sort of the foundation of the ship being established. And what draws my eye at this point, beyond the sort of the wings leading back to the four engines, the wings and then the main body, that sort of elegant swoopy shape of the main body, is this hunch on the back. It has sort of an interesting freight train, sort of a slightly menacing touch to an otherwise elegant design. I'm allowing myself to catch happy accidents here as well. You can see how the front of the wing and the sort of the rear recess of this main body shape sort of gives a V shape, and I accentuate that by placing sort of a container or a weapon or something where these two shapes meet. You can see here I'm continuing the hunchback shape, trying to explore how that can look. And what's funny about this is it's not only about elegance, it is also about character. And having this strange hunched back on the craft is sort of surprising. I'm sort of surprising myself as I do it. So of course, being inspired by the Blackbird and elegant designs in general, there are a few designs, sort of principles I'm going towards here, like length and direction, but also surprises, sort of like, for instance, these opposite pointed tail fins, for instance. So I'm balancing out what is pleasing, and I'm balancing out that with a touch of let's say unnerving flavor. So I feel like it's time for a new texture set for this bird. And here I skipped ahead a little bit, and you can see some of my references here on the right. This texture is made from sort of a bash of older textures that I had laying around, and I know I want this sort of interesting chrome used universe flavor. As I mentioned, it could really fit a few different types of universes, but I would say it's fairly realistic in a texture sense, but it's also quite expressive. That's why I'm finding references of worn aircraft and busted up surfaces and you know, a surface that has been smothered with oil and leaks and weathering and wind and rain and whatnot. Beyond the fact that that's I would say, a challenging task to do, paint. I'm one that's very inspired by, let's say, watching model kit videos and weathering in general. I think it's really interesting to look at, but I also really think it's interesting to do. And, if you have a stressed day job, or if you have, a pressure on your shoulders and you like to unwind with some zen. I mean, some people garden, some people do actual model kits. I certainly like to paint textures, so that's what I'm doing here. And I feel like a model builder using my brushes. And these brushes, by the way, are available on my site, technouveau.net. I'll leave the link down below, so you can get these brushes and get started with your own weathering projects if you desire. And I feel like I can get away with quite a lot of detail in the texture, so I don't have to model it. I'm let's say, a little lazy in that sense. I prefer to paint my way out of the problem rather than model my way out of the problem. As you'll see later, some of that modeling is ridiculously bad. I apologize for the faint of heart, but because it is relatively easy for me to do texture work, and I'm as an old concept artist, I'm quite well versed in Photoshop and brush use and sort of all that stuff. So I prefer to paint my way out of it. So here we are again with the texture. It has gone a little further, and some of that grime is settled, and now I'm toying with adding some of that wrinkly distress flair to some of these surfaces. I'm inspired by 60s jet aircraft, carrier operations, things like that, where the otherwise quite pristine surfaces of jets really get bashed and smashed by weather, salt, temperature changes, and whatnot. Combat probably as well. So all the grime I can imagine, and you can see the chaos of this process. Like I mentioned in the beginning, is that there isn't a huge structure to what I'm doing. I'm doing what my eye. I'm sort of responding to the sensation I have when I look at it. So I'm airbrushing and griming, and in 1 second, and then the next second I'm drawing lines, outlines. I have these things in layers. So let's say I come from these patchworks onto the line work. I select the line layer and then I draw some lines. Oftentimes I forget which layer I'm on and I'll make some mistakes, fix them later. But I allow myself to have fun with it and be free and just play along. Because I oftentimes, for me, if I get too detailed about process while I'm having fun and while I'm having ideas, I'm hampering myself. I sort of get strung down. I sort of get weighed down by naming layers. I have a few named layers here I can see, but mostly it's pretty lax, and I trust that I can save it in the end if need be. I trust that, meaning I will choose looseness over control most of the time. That works well for me. I certainly understand if it doesn't work well for you, but here I'm sharing my process, and I would say there's pros and cons to it, obviously, and we can talk about that at length. If you have any questions, of course, leave comments, and I'll do my best to answer them either in the comment section or in a future video. So again, here you can see it's all about griming. It's all about adding these layers of dirt and filth. And when I feel satisfied that I'm in a good place, I hurry up back into Blender, check out the texture in 3D space, and check out the reflections and how they feel and how they look. Fix problems in normal maps, like say normalization, make sure the surface is pure and clean, or whatnot, and come back and sort of check how it looks. I do this quite a lot, back and forth between Photoshop and Blender. In your case, it might be some other software, but back and forth between the different methods of expression and the different methods of control. I find that quite important because, of course, you can do a lot of, let's say, contrast and grime modification in Blender if you want to in the shader. I find it to be quite nice to have a lot of it in the shader, in the texture, I'm sorry. Also because in the sense that what I'm doing here is sort of manual. I want it to feel sort of drawn. Here you can see I'm painting grime and scratches and whatnot, laying them out over the whole texture surface, and then blending them back into the main texture. These particular Blender texture nodes I've learned from YouTube, so they should be readily available, and I think I have some of these overviews available on my ArtStation as well. I imagine I'll do a proper shading video in the future as well. So let's save that for then, save the details of that for then. Here I want to talk about the overall principles, which is really about treating this like Photoshop. So I'm blending sort of with an RGB mix node. I'm blending in these different layers, and then I'm using the edge detection and the AO shader to blend these two textures together. So what you saw earlier was a clean version of the texture, and here I'm then blending in this grime, smashed up grime texture I just made. You can see, depending on what type of mixing you choose, it's kind of like flipping through your Photoshop blend layers. You can get all kinds of effects, and I would advise you, if you play with Blender, to, once you have a setup that you feel comfortable with, you can really go crazy and just test out a bunch of different things and methods and whatnot. Again, like I mentioned, back to the texture itself, redistribute some scratches and redraw a little bit. And as you can see, trying to make it feel sort of analog and handmade, because I think it has sort of a charm to it. Also, it's easier to do than probably mathematically or photo sourcing all the scratches. It's really enjoyable for me to do this sort of stuff. So I go a little overboard maybe, but at the same time I think it adds to the look. Here you can see I'm testing with a big yellow contrast color, and just to sort of check where the boundaries of the two textures merging is. R is English. Here you can see that there's so many different types of expression you can get by blending. And to be perfectly honest, I was rewatching this process the other day, and I think here I'm just going crazy. And this is where it's difficult not to lose yourself and just spend an entire evening rubbing back and forth on these silly shader nodes. It's a little ridiculous. All right. Thanks for all the shader and texture work. That was fun. I feel like the four engines are a very sort of recognizable and striking part of this design. So I want to spend a bit of time on customizing them and making them look better. And here you are unfortunately witnessing my terrible modeling skills. I'm so sorry. But you know, you gotta do what you can with what you got, right? So here I'm doing my feeble thing, and for me, what's important here, of course, is modeling is important because you know, without it you can't get the shapes you want. But I would say modeling is a secondary to the design, and so for me it's about the layout of these shapes. It's about how they relate to each other. It's about the flow of the lines, more so than it's about good topology and otherwise modeling. Let's say quality. I will fix mistakes if I spot them, but as you can see here, I'm, you know, struggling a little bit. You can see the texture is getting messed up, and the whole thing is getting a little bit clunky to the point where I'm like, okay, whatever, I have to remodel this. Nothing wrong with building a test shape, right? Upon which you can then understand the portions you need and the particularities of the shape that you need. And you can see this time around it's much easier for me to get the result I want. So if the shape is complicated enough, that warrants a bit of a test, a bit of a prototype. If you. This is what I mean. So I mess up the texture and I remap it. I view this shape from above, and I do a cylindrical modeling so that the texture sort of wraps around. And with that method, I can go in and map it quite easily to get some nice results. And people often ask, like, how do I do my mapping and texturing? This is really it. It's really about cylindrical and box mapping and stuff like that. And then I know the texture well enough to know where to sort of place it to get good results. And at the same time, of course, I've worked in the yellow and the red stripe. They're in the texture map, so they aren't decals, which gives some absolute problems at times. But I choose speed and efficiency over ultimate customizability. Let's say you can end up in a situation where you texture an area and the red stripe appears, and you don't want that. You got to fix that in another way, which is a bit clumsy. Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, I can move extremely fast with this type of trim sheet that I have here. and it's fairly effective on a memory budget. So here you can see I'm struggling a bit with my modeling skills, my mapping skills, my face selection skills and whatnot, but ever so slowly I'm getting to a place where I feel good about the shape. This is the example I was talking about earlier, where I go to town on a shape. You know, a bunch of the Greeble stuff that works out of the box, that's pretty easy, pretty forgiving. Wings and cockpits and all that came from the kit, and I feel pretty happy about that. But this intake, okay, got to me, and I really dug in there, and I entrenched myself in the task of trying to design a shape that felt original, unique to this craft, and yet with a sort of a recognizable color scheme. Namely the red, white, and yellow and black. It feels sort of like American Navy aircraft from the 60s, but also a little space shuttle-y. Here I skip ahead in time because I've built sort of this nacelle and the sort of jet-like intakes into it, and I think it has an interesting look that makes it feel both like a spacecraft flavor, but also like an atmospheric flavor. And I like that it feels credible and fantastical all at once. And that's what makes me say that this design could potentially fit in different universes, from Star Wars to Mass Effect. Maybe it's a little more Mass Effectian, this one. Here's some more mapping. I'm inspired by getting a look, sort of a look of those heat tiles from the shuttle and whatnot, to have the black underside and a white overside, white top. And again, it's not super duper detailed and not super specific. It's just to hold up sort of at arm's length, so to speak. So yeah, that's a quick overview of the design thoughts, how the model is bashed together by with different parts. It's a look at the texturing process, the shading process, the modeling process, what's important. And I think one thing just to mention about this is this is an older recording of a design I've done. So I came back and revisited to do the speech for you guys. And what was fun to see was the crazy amount of time spent on that air nacelle there, the intake, as well as some of that shader blur there. And for good and bad, right? The shader blur, I can see myself spending a few evenings just back and forth with that stuff, and it's just crazy. So I would say, piece of advice for myself is like, okay, leave it good enough, and then finish the design, come back to it if you need to, but careful not to fall into that pit. Whereas I would say the opposite about the engine intake and the nacelle there. That's absolutely pivotal for the design, that gets the time it deserves and the time it needs, because the design sort of stands and falls with that. Obviously, when I see it now, there's a few things I would like to fix. If you've seen some of my earlier videos, you might know that that's a pattern, right? I'm sure a lot of designers would agree. You go, thanks for the start, Rasmus. That was cool. Though, there's a few things I want to fix. I might go back to it, I might not. But that's it for today. Thanks for checking it out.